The security footage flickered to life, stark and cold in black and white, casting a ghostly glow across the Patterson living room. 10-year-old Emma sat frozen on the edge of the couch, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the screen. Her father, James Patterson, sat beside her, his brow furrowed, hands clenched in his lap. Officer Reynolds stood across the room, his eyes scanning the screen as the timestamp flashed. 4:37 p.m. "Watch," Officer Reynolds said, his voice soft but firm. Emma's eyes, wide with anxiety, traced the movement on the screen. A small figure pedaled furiously into view, her legs working desperately to push the bicycle forward. It was Emma, caught in an almost surreal moment, a still frame of frantic motion. Behind her, a shape appeared, large, dark, and determined. A German shepherd, its coat matted and worn, its tongue hanging from its mouth in exhaustion, yet it chased with relentless energy. One ear was missing, its jagged edges a testament to past battles. But the dog's amber eyes shone with purpose, undeterred by its battered body. James's jaw tightened. "Keep watching," the officer urged, pointing at the screen as the camera angle shifted. The scene widened to reveal more. 3 teenagers, laughing cruelly as they emerged from the woods, rocks in hand. The camera switched to another angle, capturing the moment the Rottweilers appeared, their savage barks tearing through the otherwise quiet trail. They lunged at Emma's bicycle, their teeth snapping with ferocity. From across the street, Arnold Weber lowered his binoculars, his face lined with years of experience and worry. He watched with the calm of someone who had seen many things in life, but this moment, this scene, gripped him. With his heart heavy, he reached for his phone, dialing with trembling hands. "My God," James whispered as the footage continued. He could feel his heart race in his chest, his hands trembling. It felt unreal, as if the world was tilting just out of his control. The dog, no, Ranger, wasn't simply following. It wasn't merely there out of chance. This was more than a random act. Something deeper, something primal had stirred within the dog's bones. A sense of duty, perhaps, or a calling that transcended both fear and exhaustion. The screen zoomed in on the dog, its form a mix of desperation and raw determination. Ranger wasn't just running anymore. He was fighting for something far more important than survival. James stared, his thoughts a whirlwind, unable to grasp the full meaning of what was unfolding before him. What had led this dog to Emma? And what had happened to the once strong, loyal animal who had fallen into this state? "Ranger," Emma murmured, her voice barely audible as she wiped away fresh tears. She didn't understand. She didn't know yet that this dog, this broken creature who had once belonged to someone, was fighting for her life. But here, in this moment, on this screen, it was clear. The dog was more than just a survivor. He was a protector. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she watched herself in the footage, her bike swerving slightly as she rode faster, her small frame dwarfed by the terrifying presence of the Rottweilers. The dog, now racing beside her, made no move to attack, only to stand between her and the advancing threat. His posture was steadfast, unyielding, as though he was saying, "I'll be here until you're safe." "Why is he doing this?" Emma asked, her voice trembling, yet soft, with an awe she hadn't quite acknowledged. Her father's voice was tight as he answered, "I don't know, sweetheart." And neither did Officer Reynolds. But one thing was undeniable. This dog, broken and scarred as he was, wasn't following Emma by accident. He had chosen her. And now, as the world around them seemed to hold its breath, there was no going back. The first chapter of their bond had begun. As the footage continued to roll, Emma's breath caught in her throat, her fingers trembling as she clutched the edge of the couch. The dog was still there, always at a distance, but never straying too far. Ranger was in the shadows, as if waiting, watching, as though he knew the danger ahead of her, the peril she hadn't yet seen. Her father shifted beside her, his hand momentarily resting on her shoulder, a silent gesture of comfort, but it did nothing to ease the rising panic in Emma's chest. She wasn't sure what was more frightening, the relentless pursuit of the dog or the unknown dangers lurking ahead on the trail. The soft whir of the camera's zoom cut through the silence, amplifying the mounting sense of dread. "Do you see that?" Officer Reynolds asked quietly. His voice was gentle, but his eyes never left the screen. "Keep watching, Emma." The image on the screen changed again, and Emma's heart skipped a beat as it showed the moment she stopped. The path in front of her seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the impending unknown. She leaned over to drink from her water bottle, unaware of the presence behind her. The camera captured it all, the way the silence swallowed the forest, the way the wind seemed to still. But Ranger, hidden in the underbrush, was aware. His posture shifted, alert, ears pricked, eyes narrowing as he took in every movement, every breath of the girl who had unknowingly wandered into his charge. The sound of a twig snapping underfoot broke the spell, and Emma's head jerked around, her eyes wide in sudden fear. "Hello?" she called out, her voice tentative. The forest around her seemed to pulse with an energy she couldn't explain, like the trees themselves were holding their breath in anticipation. Ranger, ever watchful, stayed perfectly still, his amber eyes gleaming in the darkness, his movements as calculated as a predator's. He did not growl or bark. He did not make himself known. Instead, he crouched low, hidden from view, letting the quiet of the forest speak for him. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, his muscles coiled in readiness. Emma, though she couldn't see the dog, felt the change in the air. Her instincts were already on alert, but it was too late. She turned and began pedaling faster, the sound of her tires scraping against the gravel path, masking any noise that Ranger made as he began to move again. The distance between them remained, but it was always closing, step by step, pedal by pedal. There was something undeniably strange about this connection, something Emma couldn't quite grasp, but felt deeply in her bones. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of something unfamiliar. Ranger froze, his body tense, every fiber of his being alert. Ahead, a new smell. Human, but not the comforting scent of those he had known. No, this was something darker. The smell of cigarette smoke, the sour tang of cheap beer. 3 figures emerged through the trees, their voices low, carrying with them the promise of trouble. Emma couldn't see them yet, but she felt them. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled, and her heart rate spiked. She was alone. No one would hear her if something happened. She couldn't go back the way she had come. The path ahead was narrowing, and the trees loomed closer. Her grip tightened around the handlebars as she quickened her pace, trying to outrun the sensation crawling up her spine. Ranger's muscles flexed under his scarred coat. His instincts, honed through years of training and survival, kicked into high gear. He could smell the boys, feel their intent, even before they made themselves known. This was not the time for hesitation. He moved forward, silently but swiftly, staying in the shadows, a shadow himself, never straying too close to her, but always there, watching, guarding. As Emma approached the clearing, her eyes widened as she saw the boys ahead, lounging on the rocks. They weren't just teenagers, they were trouble, the kind that made her chest tighten with anxiety. Zach Miller, his lanky frame towering over the others, was the first to stand when he saw her. His voice rang out with an exaggerated mockery that made Emma's stomach twist. "Well, look who it is," he sneered, stepping into her path. "Patterson's kid." Her fingers clenched around the handlebars, but she said nothing, pushing past him as her heart raced. But Zach was quicker, his hand reaching out and grabbing the front of her bike. "Where are you headed in such a hurry, Patterson?" Emma's eyes darted nervously to the sides. She had to get home, had to make it back to safety. But with Zach standing in her way, the world seemed to shrink around her. "Let go," she demanded, pulling the bike away, but his grip tightened. Emma's pulse quickened. The first stone hit, thudding against her bike, but she didn't flinch. Then another, and another. The bullies were closing in, and there was no way around them. She could hear their laughter, but it wasn't funny. It was a threat. The sound of a growl broke through the tension, low and menacing. The boys stopped mid-laugh, their faces changing as they turned toward the sound. From the shadows, Ranger emerged. His body was rigid, his muscles taut as he moved into the clearing, his amber eyes never leaving the group of boys. His growl deepened, an unmistakable warning that had no intention of being ignored. Zach's face twisted with fear. "Is that a wolf?" one of the other boys hissed. Ranger stood firm, his body a living wall between Emma and the bullies. He was more than a protector now. He was a force, an instinctive wall of defense. The morning had begun with a sense of normalcy, a sense of freedom Emma wasn't sure she could ever embrace fully. It had been 3 years since her mother's death, yet the pain still lingered, a quiet ache in her chest that would never fade completely. She pedaled through the woods, the trees around her towering like silent witnesses, their branches creaking softly in the wind. The sunlight filtered through the gaps in the canopy, casting dappled patterns across the path, fleeting shadows that seemed to mirror the unease Emma tried to suppress. Her father had tried to shelter her from the world, but Emma couldn't stay in the confines of their small house forever. She had to go, had to be alone with her thoughts for a while, even if it meant facing the anxiety that always gripped her when she was out there, away from the safety of home. It wasn't the bike rides that scared her. It was the feeling of being abandoned, of being left to deal with the things she didn't understand. She didn't know how to let go of the fear that clung to her after the loss of her mother, or the worries that filled her father's worried glances. The day felt heavy, oppressive with its heat. The temperature climbed steadily, the midday sun baking everything beneath it. Emma's helmet stuck to her forehead with sweat, her legs already aching from the effort. But she kept going, focused on the path ahead, not letting her mind wander to the dark places where her grief hid. She hadn't thought much about the woods or the strange presence that had followed her until now. There was always something unsettling about these trails. They were supposed to be familiar, but something in them made her skin crawl. The deep quiet, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the way the shadows moved as if alive always made her heart race a little faster. But Emma was determined. The more she pedaled, the more she left behind the heaviness of her own thoughts. The air in the woods was thick with the scent of pine needles and earth, a smell so rich and deep it seemed to pull her in, to ground her. Her mind wandered to her grandmother's house, a few kilometers away, the cool, welcoming porch with its old rocking chairs, the scent of Nana's cookies that lingered in the air. But Emma didn't want to get there too quickly. The journey itself was important, a part of who she was becoming, a young girl finding her own way. As she continued her ride, Emma thought of her father, his perpetual worry. He wasn't used to raising her alone. He wasn't used to the absence of her mother, the space that could never be filled. Emma had inherited her mother's stubbornness, her independence, and it both worried and inspired James Patterson. He tried to balance between holding on too tight and letting go, knowing he couldn't protect her from everything. He wanted to, but he couldn't. Barbara, her grandmother, had tried to help, tried to fill the gap her daughter had left. It was Barbara who had insisted on installing the tracking app on Emma's phone, a concession to her growing sense of independence. "She needs some freedom, James," Barbara had said. Margaret would have wanted that. But the truth was, no one really understood Emma's need for that freedom. Not completely. They all thought they could protect her, that they could guide her. But Emma was learning that she could protect herself, even if she didn't quite understand how. Her bike tires hummed on the dirt path, a steady rhythm that soothed her thoughts. Her legs moved fluidly, their steady push against the pedals driving her forward. It wasn't until she stopped to take a drink of water, the familiar coolness of the bottle against her lips, that she realized something was different. A soft rustle from behind her, an echo of movement, not quite human. Emma froze, the water bottle still in her hand, her heart stuttering in her chest. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the thick woods that lined the trail, but nothing appeared. No one was there. "Hello?" she called out, her voice small against the vastness of the forest. The silence that followed was thick, unnerving. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had stopped blowing. Even the leaves seemed to hold their breath. Emma's pulse raced in her ears, the familiar sense of unease curling in her stomach. She waited a moment, straining to listen, but the world around her remained still, unmoving. Her eyes scanned the trees again, searching for any sign of life. Nothing. Taking a deep breath, Emma mounted her bike again, the path ahead growing narrower, the trees leaning in like silent spectators. She forced herself to calm down, telling herself it was nothing. It was just her imagination, or the forest, playing tricks on her. But as she pedaled forward, the feeling of being watched returned, heavier now. The rustling behind her was no longer a fleeting thing. It was constant, a soft, measured movement, keeping pace with her. She pedaled faster, her heart pounding in her chest, but the sound kept coming, never straying too far. She felt eyes on her, a presence following her. "Is someone there?" she asked into the empty space, her voice higher now, trembling with uncertainty. The rustling stopped. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then, without warning, the brush shifted, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the German shepherd. Emma's breath hitched in her throat as the German shepherd stepped into view, his form emerging from the shadows like something out of a dream or a nightmare. His body was lean, scarred, and weary, with patches of fur missing, but his eyes, amber and intense, locked onto hers. He stood still, unmoving, his gaze unwavering. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the dog. Fear gripped her immediately. Her mind flashed back to the stories she'd heard, the tales of wild animals, the ones that lurked in the woods, waiting to attack. This was no friendly pet. This was a strange, wild creature, scarred and ragged, watching her with a gaze that made her skin crawl. Her mind screamed at her to move, to get away. Without thinking, she kicked the pedals harder, pushing her bike forward with all her strength. She had to get away from the dog. She didn't know why, but something inside her said he wasn't there to help. He was there to hurt. But as she sped down the trail, she heard the unmistakable sound of the dog's paws behind her, matching her pace, never faltering. The growl that rumbled from his throat sent a chill through her, deeper than any wind she had felt in the forest. The sound was primal, raw, and filled with a sense of command. Keep moving. Just keep moving. Emma's thoughts were frantic as she glanced behind her. expecting to see the dog charging toward her, ready to pounce. But when she looked back, he was still there, 50 yards behind, his body low to the ground, running with purpose but not aggression. He wasn't chasing her. He was following her. Confusion clouded Emma's mind. The dog didn't look like a protector. He looked like a threat, like something that could turn on her in an instant. Her heart raced faster, each beat a thundering drum in her chest, as she tried to outrun him. But no matter how fast she pedaled, he stayed at the same distance, trotting easily behind her. It felt wrong, unnatural, as if the forest itself had become an enemy. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here, something she didn't yet understand. As she neared the clearing, her eyes locked onto a group of teenagers lounging near a large rock. The moment they spotted her, they stood, their movements exaggerated as they blocked her path. She recognized them immediately. Zach Miller, Derek Simmons, and Travis Cooper. The troublemakers who made every school hallway feel like a minefield. They had a reputation for causing problems. And now, as they stepped into her path, Emma felt the familiar knot of fear tighten in her stomach. "Well, well, look who it is," Zach called out, his voice dripping with mockery. His gangly form towered over Emma as he took a step forward, blocking her way. "Patterson's kid. What's the rush?" Emma's grip tightened on the handlebars, her mind racing. She could feel her pulse in her neck, could feel the blood rush to her face in humiliation. She didn't want to deal with them. Not today. Not with the strange dog following her, the weight of the forest pressing in from all sides. She needed to get away, but they wouldn't let her. "I'm just passing through," Emma muttered, trying to steer her bike around Zach. But he stepped into her way, his hand shooting out to grab the front of her handlebars. "Where you headed in such a hurry?" Zach smirked, his grip tight on the bike. His friends snickered behind him, their voices low and threatening. Emma could feel the heat rising in her chest, the anger pushing back the fear. She yanked the handlebars again, trying to break free, but Zach only tightened his hold. "Let go," she demanded, her voice stronger than before, though her heart pounded with the knowledge that this was a fight she didn't want. The last thing she needed was trouble. She wasn't looking for a confrontation, but they were determined to make one. "Make me," Zach challenged, the malice in his eyes unmistakable. The words were a dare, and the tension in the air thickened as Emma hesitated. A moment later, he shoved the bike hard, sending it tumbling to the ground. The force of it knocked Emma off balance, and she fell onto the dirt path, scraping her knee against a rock. She gasped, pain shooting through her leg, but she scrambled to her feet, refusing to let them see her weakness. The blood from her scraped knee mingled with the dirt and dust, but she ignored it, her focus solely on getting away. Her pride was on the line now, and no matter what, she wouldn't let them see her cry. "Nice bike," Zach jeered, crouching down to grab Emma's backpack, which had spilled open when she fell. "What have you got in here? Anything worth taking?" Before Emma could respond, a low, menacing growl echoed through the clearing. The sound was unmistakable, louder, more threatening than before. It was Ranger. The bullies froze, their eyes widening as they turned to face the German Shepherd. The dog had emerged from the trees, his scarred body glistening with sweat and blood, his amber eyes locked onto the boys. And in that moment, he seemed to grow larger, more imposing. His growl grew deeper, resonating with an animal instinct that had been awakened. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a warrior, a guardian. Zach took a step back, but his bravado remained. "Is that a wolf?" he asked, his voice cracking with unease. Ranger advanced, his body tense, his muscles rippling under his scarred coat. He placed himself squarely between Emma and the group of boys, his growl deepening into a snarl. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't backing down. This was no longer a mere confrontation. This was a warning. "Stay back," Zack muttered, his bravado faltering as he slowly backed away. The other two boys followed suit, their faces pale as Ranger's presence turned the air thick with tension. Without another word, Zack threw a rock, aimed directly at the dog. The stone hit Ranger's side, causing him to yelp in pain. But he didn't flinch. His gaze remained unwavering, his posture unyielding as he protected Emma. The boys kept throwing rocks, a hail of sharp projectiles, but Ranger stood his ground, taking each hit without retreating. He was guarding Emma, his duty to her more important than his own pain. His growl deepened as he faced off against the bullies, his body shaking from exhaustion, but his resolve firm. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the boys turned and fled, throwing one last volley of stones before running off down the path. Emma stood in the clearing, trembling with fear and adrenaline. She had watched the whole thing unfold, her heart racing as the German shepherd stood between her and the bullies, his body a shield. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, Emma, shaking, took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said, her words tinged with uncertainty. Ranger turned, his amber eyes meeting hers for the first time. He took a step toward her, but Emma scrambled backward, terrified. The last thing she wanted was to be near the creature who had just scared off the boys. She didn't understand why he had done it, why he was following her. She didn't know what he wanted. "Stay away!" Emma cried, her voice trembling. She swung her leg over the bike and pedaled away, not daring to look back. Ranger stood there for a moment, watching her retreat, his head tilting in confusion. He had saved her, yet she was afraid of him. He didn't understand why. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Emma's heart thudded in her chest as she pedaled faster, the sound of her tires crunching over the dirt path, mingling with the sharp breaths that escaped her lips. She could feel the cold rush of air against her face, her mind still reeling from the encounter with the boys. Her knee throbbed with pain, but she pushed it aside, focusing only on getting away, on getting home. Ranger's presence lingered in her thoughts, his amber eyes, his growl, the way he had stood between her and the bullies like a protector. But no matter how hard she tried to push the images of him away, they kept resurfacing, and with them came the unsettling realization. The dog was following her. She didn't understand why. Was it just by coincidence? Or was it something more? The path ahead twisted, winding deeper into the forest, the shadows growing longer as the sun dipped lower. Emma glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see Ranger closing in behind her, but when she looked back, the trail was empty. She breathed a sigh of relief, at least for now. She should have known better. As the forest gave way to a small clearing ahead, her relief quickly turned to dread. From the trees at the far end of the clearing, 3 Rottweilers emerged like shadows, their massive bodies moving with a purpose, their growls deep and menacing. Emma froze in place, her hands clutching the handlebars as her pulse quickened. These weren't just any dogs. They were the ones from Mr. Morgan's junkyard, the ones everyone in Pinewood knew to avoid. She had heard the rumors, how they guarded the yard, how they had chased down stray animals and smaller creatures. Now, they were charging straight at her. "Not again," Emma whispered under her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. The space between her and the Rottweilers closed rapidly, their barking growing louder with each passing second. The air thickened with their presence, and she could smell their stinking breath, their saliva dripping from their mouths as they sprinted toward her. The clearing, once a place of calm, had become a trap. Emma's mind raced, her legs trembling with panic as she tried to figure out how to escape. She couldn't go back. Ranger was still behind her, and the path ahead was blocked. She was trapped, caught between the Rottweilers and the approaching German Shepherd. Before she could decide what to do, a single voice broke through the chaos. A low growl, unmistakable, and filled with authority. It was Ranger. From the edge of the trees, Ranger appeared, his body stiff with purpose. He moved quickly, despite his injuries, his gait steady as he drew closer to the Rottweilers. The sight of the scarred German Shepherd, his fur matted and dirty, his face worn with the struggles of survival, sent a shockwave through Emma's already frazzled nerves. This was no longer just a stray following her. It was a guardian, a protector, a force of nature. The Rottweilers stopped dead in their tracks, their bodies halting, as if sensing the shift in the air. They had come with the intention of terrorizing Emma, but now they hesitated. The atmosphere crackled with tension, the wild energy of animals on the verge of a fight. Ranger didn't hesitate. He moved forward, his body low to the ground, muscles coiled and ready to strike. His amber eyes locked onto the largest Rottweiler, his posture rigid and unyielding. This was not just a confrontation. It was a battle for Emma's safety, and Ranger would not back down. The first Rottweiler lunged at him, its jaws snapping with ferocity. But Ranger was faster, his body twisting to avoid the attack. With a swift, calculated move, he aimed for the Rottweiler's throat, his powerful jaws snapping shut with bone-crushing force. The Rottweiler howled in pain, stumbling backward as blood began to stain its coat. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. She had never seen anything like this. This wasn't a dogfight. This was something primal, something ancient, where the survival of the innocent was at stake. But the Rottweilers weren't done. The second one moved in, biting at Ranger's flank with a vicious snarl. Emma winced, the sight of the dog's teeth sinking into Ranger's already injured side, making her stomach turn. The German Shepherd yelped in pain, but his resolve remained unbroken. He fought back with a brutal force, twisting and turning as he bit down hard on the Rottweiler's ear, tearing through the flesh with a growl that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. The third Rottweiler circled around, trying to flank Ranger, but the German Shepherd's instincts were honed, his every movement calculated. He shifted with the precision of a soldier, positioning himself between the last Rottweiler and Emma. His body was a barrier, a wall of protection against the threat that was closing in. With a final, decisive move, Ranger leaped onto the last Rottweiler, his teeth sinking into its leg with the power of a trained canine. The Rottweiler howled in agony, its massive body tumbling backward, the fight drained from it in an instant. The clearing fell silent. The Rottweilers, defeated and wounded, limped off into the woods, their spirits broken by the relentless force of Ranger's defense. He stood tall, his body heaving with exhaustion, but his eyes never left Emma. Emma stood frozen in place, her heart still racing, her breath shallow as she tried to process what had just happened. The dog, this dog, had just fought 3 Rottweilers to protect her. She had seen the fierceness in his eyes, the loyalty in his stance, but it wasn't until now that she fully understood. This was no ordinary dog. He was something more. He had a purpose, and it was tied to her. But fear still gripped her. She didn't know how to trust him, how to trust something so wild, so unpredictable. Ranger's gaze locked onto hers, his amber eyes full of confusion, as though he didn't understand why she was afraid. "Stay away," she shouted, her voice shaking, as she swung her leg over the bike and pedaled away, desperate to escape the dog's presence, the feeling of danger that still clung to her like a second skin. Ranger didn't follow right away. Instead, he stood there, watching her retreat, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. He had done what he was meant to do. He had protected her, and now it was up to her to decide what came next. Emma's heart thundered in her chest as she pedaled faster, the rush of wind no longer providing the relief it once had. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion, the pain in her knee forgotten in the wake of the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had to get home. She had to get there before the world caught up to her. Ranger's presence was undeniable now, a steady force behind her, his body still in motion despite the wounds that marred him. She could hear him, just behind her, his paws crunching on the dirt, his breath heavy, labored. His steps were measured, but they were consistent. It was as if he were never going to stop following her, as if his purpose had shifted from simply protecting her to something deeper, something more essential. She glanced over her shoulder once, catching a glimpse of him in the fading light of the forest. The scarred German shepherd was still there, his amber eyes fixed on her, his body low to the ground as he kept his pace. There was no hostility in his movements, only determination. It was almost as though he were guarding her. Emma's chest tightened. This wasn't just a chase anymore. She wasn't running from him. No, this was something else. She had been running from the truth. From the moment she had seen him follow her on the trail, there had been something in the way his eyes met hers, something in the quiet, unspoken bond that had begun to form between them. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't understand why he was still following her. But every time she looked back, he was there, calm, focused, and unwavering. His presence was a constant, just like the weight of her own heartache, her own confusion. It was as though he knew something she didn't, something she wasn't ready to face yet. The world blurred as she pedaled harder, pushing herself past the familiar landmarks of the trail. She passed the old oak tree, the narrow bridge over Pinewood Creek, and the familiar clearing where the Rottweilers had attacked her. She was almost home, but her legs were starting to give out. The fatigue was too much. She needed to stop, but she couldn't. Not yet. The path ahead opened up into the town, the edge of Pinewood coming into view. Emma felt a flicker of relief, a fleeting moment of safety, a sense of returning to something familiar. But as the homes grew closer, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She could still hear Ranger, still feel his presence. But now, it wasn't just the dog she feared. It was the sense of being trapped between two worlds, the one where she had once felt safe, and the one that was slowly closing in on her. She had escaped the bullies, escaped the Rottweilers, but now she was on the verge of something far more terrifying. The van. The white van she had seen earlier. The one that had driven off just as she had approached the end of her street. It was still fresh in her mind, the way the door had cracked open and then slammed shut. It had been watching her. It had been waiting. Emma's breathing quickened, her eyes darting from side to side as she neared the intersection. The sound of the van's engine still echoed in her ears, though the street was quiet. No one was around. There was no one to help if something happened. As she turned the corner onto Maple Street, she caught sight of her house. Home. The familiar two-story colonial with its white siding and blue shutters. It was so close. She could see her father's truck parked in the driveway, the comforting sight of her home, the place where she was supposed to feel safe. But as her eyes flicked back to the street behind her, she froze. The van. It was there, parked on the side of the street, its engine idling. Emma's pulse shot up in her throat. The van was waiting for her. Her blood ran cold as she realized it wasn't just following her. It was watching her. Ranger's growl echoed through the air, sharp and low. Emma turned in time to see the dog closing the distance between them. His pace had slowed, but he was still there, relentless, determined. His amber eyes flicked toward the van, his posture tensing as he recognized the threat. Emma's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about them, about her and the dog who had chosen to follow her. She didn't know what to do. She had no more options. She was trapped between the van and the dog, between the known and the unknown. The only thing she could do was keep moving. She pedaled faster, her breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She could feel the van's eyes on her, the dark presence that followed her every move. But she couldn't let it stop her. Not now. Ranger was still behind her, but the gap between them had closed. She could hear his labored breathing, his body pushing forward with every ounce of strength he had left. The woods had long since faded away, and now the town was around them, the sounds of normal life growing distant as she raced through the streets, her heart pounding with fear, with the terror of not knowing what would happen next. She had to get home. She had to get to her father. As she approached the final stretch of road, Emma could see her house, just ahead. It was almost within reach, almost there. Her father's truck was parked in the driveway, and Emma could see the faint outline of him through the window, working in the yard. She was so close to the safety she had been longing for. But her legs were burning, her vision narrowing with exhaustion. The sound of her tires against the asphalt seemed to blur, the world around her growing hazy. But then, as she neared the driveway, a cold chill ran down her spine. The van was moving. Slowly, quietly, it began to follow her. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She was so close, but so far away. "Dad!" she screamed, her voice cracking with the weight of her fear. "Dad!" She didn't wait to see if he heard her. She just kept pedaling, pushing her bike to the limit, the pain in her legs no longer registering as she raced toward her front door. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her keys, her mind spinning with everything that had happened, with everything that was still unfolding. Just as she reached the porch, she heard the sound of a truck engine revving. Her father's truck had pulled into the driveway, and Emma didn't wait. She dropped her bike, her body moving in a blur as she rushed to the door. "Dad!" she cried again. But this time the fear was different. It was sharper, more immediate. James Patterson was already outside, his eyes scanning the street as he approached her. Emma collapsed into his arms, her body shaking with exhaustion, with relief. "Emma, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice tight with concern as he held her. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she looked over her shoulder at the road behind her, where the van had stopped. And there, standing in the distance, was Ranger. The German Shepherd had followed her all the way home. And now, as he stood between Emma and the van, he was more than just a protector. He was her guardian. The sound of Emma's breath was sharp in her ears, her lungs burning from the desperate sprint home. As she collapsed into her father's arms, the weight of everything that had happened crashed down on her. For the first time in days, she felt a strange sense of safety. Yet, the events still didn't make sense. The confusion, the fear, the overwhelming sense of protection from the German Shepherd. It was all too much to process. "Dad, it followed me," she whispered, her voice strained, tears still clinging to her lashes. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to explain the feeling that had been with her for hours now. Ranger, this dog, this broken creature, had been with her through every moment of danger, every step of the way, never once leaving her side. James tightened his grip on her, his heart pounding with concern. He hadn't yet processed everything either. His thoughts were scattered, his protective instincts running wild. His first impulse had been to shield her from this dog, this wild animal who had appeared from nowhere. But now, as he looked toward the street, his gaze caught the German Shepherd standing near the driveway, bloodied but unwavering. His stance was calm, his eyes fixed on Emma. He had done his job, had followed her home like a soldier fulfilling a sacred duty. "Is he okay?" Emma asked, her voice trembling as she peered around her father's shoulder, eyes locking on Ranger's weary form. "He'll be all right, sweetie," James replied, though he didn't fully believe it himself. He wasn't sure what had happened to the dog, how he had found Emma, why he had stayed with her through all of this. But one thing was clear. The German Shepherd had protected her when no one else had. And for that, James couldn't ignore the bond that had formed between them. But just as the question of the dog's fate seemed to hang in the air, the deep hum of police sirens echoed down the street, a heavy presence that made everything feel more real. Officer Reynolds, who had been involved in the initial investigation, pulled up alongside James's truck, his cruiser's lights flashing in the growing darkness. He stepped out, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Mr. Patterson, I need to talk to you about the dog," Officer Reynolds said, his eyes scanning the front yard, the porch, and then landing on the German Shepherd. Emma, still clutching her father's arm, turned to him, the weight of the day's events pulling at her. She wanted to ask so many things. Why had Ranger followed her? What did it all mean? But she couldn't bring herself to speak. The dog's presence was already more than she had ever anticipated. "Is he dangerous?" James asked, his voice low, protective. He had been ready to protect Emma from the dog, but now things had changed. He wasn't sure how to feel anymore. Officer Reynolds shook his head, his gaze softening as he took in the scene before him. He looked at Ranger, who was now seated on the lawn, looking almost exhausted, but resolute. "No, Mr. Patterson, he's not dangerous. In fact, I'd say he's been more of a protector than anything else. We've been reviewing the footage, the calls. It seems like this dog, this German Shepherd, has been following your daughter for a reason." Emma stepped forward, her voice trembling but sure. "He saved me, officer. From the bullies, from the Rottweilers, and maybe even from the van. He was protecting me." Reynolds met her gaze, nodding slowly. "Yes, that's exactly it. We've been piecing things together. The van you saw earlier, it wasn't just following you. We think it was monitoring you, waiting for the right moment. And this dog, well, he picked up on that." "Picked up on it?" James repeated, his mind reeling. The connection wasn't clear, but the pieces were starting to fit together. "Yes," Reynolds continued. "The microchip we found on the dog links him to the Henderson family. Their house burned down 3 months ago, and they thought he perished in the fire. But he didn't die. He survived, and now he's been acting as a guardian, following children, protecting them from threats we didn't even know existed." Emma stood frozen, the pieces falling into place like a puzzle, yet something was still missing. "What do you mean, protecting children?" she asked, her voice small. Reynolds looked at her with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "This dog, Ranger, he's been trained in a way. His instincts as a working dog are incredible. He's not just following you, Emma. He's been protecting you from threats, from the bullies on the trail, from the Rottweilers, and possibly even from those men in the van." Emma's eyes widened. She had felt the fear in the air that day, the fear that something else was watching her, something dangerous. And now, it was clear. The dog, the one she had feared, had been her protector all along. "So, what happens to him now?" Emma asked, her voice full of concern. She could no longer imagine her life without this dog, this silent guardian who had risked his life to keep her safe. Reynolds paused, his face softening. "We're still figuring out what's next. But for now, I think we all owe this dog more than we can give. He's earned his place here, He's already proven that. James looked down at Emma, his heart swelling with a complicated mix of pride and awe. "We're not letting him go to the shelter," he said, his voice firm, finally understanding the bond that had formed between his daughter and this dog. Emma turned to him, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and relief. "Dad, we can keep him?" "We'll make sure he has a home, Emma. A real home. A family." James smiled, his face full of hope. Ranger, hearing the soft exchange, turned his head toward the family. His amber eyes met Emma's once more, and this time there was no hesitation. He wasn't a stranger anymore. He wasn't just a stray. He was part of their family.